Dennis Jones was an 82-year-old retired grandfather living in Virginia. He thought he found love on Facebook with a woman named Jessie. For months, she texted him daily and convinced him they shared a profound bond. He was so excited because she was so young and so beautiful and so responsive to his messages. Dennis ended up moving every cent he had into a fraudulent cryptocurrency wallet. And then the platform locked down and demanded more funds, and he realized he had been scammed. He was completely bankrupt, no money left for retirement, and he took his own life. One worker manages up to 50 of these men at a time. These workers are receiving really explicit pictures from these men, really discussing explicit messages, and they're forced to do this day in, day out, hours at a time with no pay. There is a movement of older, lonely Western men who pack their bags for places like Mexico, Colombia, Peru, or Asia, looking for a traditional, submissive, very young woman to take as a partner. They like to think they're the ultimate alphas dominating the global dating market. But what if that beautiful girl texting them from a beach in Cancun isn't a girl at all? What if she's actually a desperate, trafficked young man trapped in a concrete bungalow in Peru, holding an iPhone with a cartel guard standing behind his chair? This is the reality of the human trafficking romance scam pipeline. Grab a snack, grab your drink, and sit down, because today we're talking about how organized crime figured out how to take male misogyny and ego and turn it into extractable data and millions of dollars. Welcome to Do You Want to Hear Something Awful? I'm your host, Alyson. On this podcast, we investigate the most toxic and dystopian and disturbing systems shaping our current world. But I also like to give you ways that you can protect yourself and your family, and I always end with pieces of positive news at the end so none of us completely lose hope. My goal is to create a podcast that will not only be educational entertainment, but also empower you to take action to make the world a better place. If you want to submit your own positivity tidbit to share or have a topic you'd like me to cover, feel free to email me at iwanttohearsomethingawful@gmail.com. When cartels are planning out their romance scams, they're not just sending out a bunch of random messages. They have narrowed this down to a very specific archetype. They are looking for an older, middle-aged, retired Western man who is highly active online, whether that's through Facebook, relationship forums, dating sites. They will look for three main factors when deciding on a mark. They will look for men who are recently divorced, widowed, or living alone in rural areas with low social interactions with other people. They're looking for isolation. The more isolated someone is, the easier to scam them, the easier to get them to really buy into this affection and emotional love bombing they're going to do. Second, men who complain about Western women being much too individual and career-oriented and want somebody younger and more submissive and traditional. Men who post really misogynistic things, and men in general who post anything that makes them look insecure or like they have this psychological need to specifically feel powerful, validated, and respected. The last and maybe the most important thing for them is asset liquidity. They want men who have a high-value retirement portfolio and low digital literacy. So somebody with a really good job, really good insurance, really good retirement, lots of funds in the bank, but really bad at technology because it makes them easy to guide them through crypto or banking apps before they even figure out what's going on and that it's a scam. Michael was sitting at home on a Tuesday afternoon when his phone buzzed with an unsolicited WhatsApp message from an unknown international number. The text read, "Hey Carlos, are we still on for our dinner reservation at the resort this Saturday?" Michael typed back, "No, sorry, you have the wrong number." The response from the other side came back almost instantly. The profile picture attached updated to a stunning, high-fashion, glamorous portrait of a young Asian woman in front of a luxury resort. And she replied, "I am so sorry to bother you, but it is fate we met. My name is Jessica, and I must have typed in the number wrong. Are you a kind person from America? Instead of rushing into a pitch or asking for money like with other scams, the person playing the role of Jessica did nothing but just build trust over 90 straight days. In the meantime, they managed Michael's chat profile on their computer and logged every detail of his life into a database. They texted him, "Good morning, handsome," and logged the exact minute he woke up. They asked about his health. They sent lots of photos depicting a wealthy lifestyle of dinners and travels. And Michael, isolated and craving validation, just dropped his natural skepticism because he thought that this woman already was wealthy and that she really cared about him and that she wouldn't have stuck around for 90 days if she didn't actually have a real interest in him. Most importantly, Michael believed that he was a catch for this beautiful young woman overseas. This woman made him feel important and powerful, and that is when Michael was considered fattened up. And 3 months into this unpaid emotional validation loop, Jessica, aka the worker for the cartel, subtly shifted the script and sent a picture of herself at this fancy restaurant saying, "I am so grateful to my uncle. He is a senior financial analyst and guided my trades on this new digital asset app today. It is how I secure my independence." It was completely seamless. Michael didn't feel targeted. He felt invited into her family's world. The syndicate that was targeting him had spent hundreds of hours talking to him about his routines and his hobbies without asking for a dime, and so he was totally not in a defensive mode and thought if she was a scammer, she wouldn't have spent 3 months talking to me all the time, 24/7, about my daily life. But he had no idea he was simply another asset for a crime organization that had designated today as his slaughter date. This is a true story, and it's an example of how psychological grooming works. Cartel-backed call centers play the long game. They don't just wait for 3 days to scam you. They will even go for up to 6 months before they even say anything about money. Cartels will literally refer to this as the fattening phase. In her official 2024 congressional testimony, prosecutor Erin West laid out the exact 120-day plan that these organizations use to build psychological dependency. West's task force documented that victims are guided to legitimate U.S. exchanges like Coinbase first, then steered to fake trading apps where data dashboards manipulate artificial profits to induce secondary wire loops, second mortgages, and 401k liquidations before a final digital lockup. Each worker on the phone working for these criminal organizations is handling up to 50 of these old men simultaneously, moving between chats on a computer with lots of tabs open. They send morning texts to everyone. They ask about the dog, the doctor's appointments. They take notes on everyone. They use a technique called interpersonal mirroring. If a target says he values loyalty and is sick of drama, the person he's talking to will suddenly become this poetic soul who hates drama and wants a loyal protector. But they don't exist. The person who's sending all of these messages is a young man who was lured to Mexico or Colombia with the promise of a high-paying tech or customer service job, but is now trapped in a human trafficking ring. This is not something where there's a few random hackers in a basement doing a few people at a time. No, this is an industrial-scale pig butchering and romance scam run from compounds that started in Southeast Asia and have officially migrated to Latin America. Major syndicates like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel have diversified their portfolios. Smuggling fentanyl and cocaine across borders has a lot of risk, and it's very expensive. And so they realize that running these digital extortion scams requires no border crossings, it has way lower legal penalties, but it also gets them hundreds of millions in untraceable cryptocurrency. A transnational crime network known as the Red Dragon Syndicate began posting fraudulent, high-paying job opportunities on social networks across Malaysia. They targeted multilingual young people and promised customer service or casino hosting contracts in major tourist capitals. 43 young men and women ended up boarding planes under the impression they were starting upwardly mobile corporate careers with promising futures and money they'd be able to send back to their family. The syndicate intentionally routed them through a complex international transit to disorient them. They flew from Asia to Amsterdam, then down to Peru. And the moment they cleared customs in Peru, the cartel operatives seized their passports, they wiped their personal devices and phones, and they dragged them to a fortified multi-story bungalow in La Molina, which was an exclusive high-security residential district in the capital city. The compound was kept under total lockdown. The handlers forced the 43 captives into rooms where the windows were permanently boarded up and sealed shut, and the workers were unable to tell if it was day or night outside and never got to look out the window. The syndicate ran them on brutal night shifts to match Western time zones. They were forced to manage phones and computer terminals, running systemic extortion, romance, and banking scripts, harvesting data, and ultimately taking cash from unsuspecting targets in the West. Think about the fact that one worker manages up to 50 of these men at a time. Of course, it's going to be related to human trafficking. There's not enough money you could pay anybody in the world to perform that much work with also such a high emotional toll. These workers are receiving really explicit pictures from these men, really discussing explicit messages, and they're forced to do this day in, day out, hours at a time with no pay. The internal conditions of these compounds are designed to break through any psychological resistance, and workers who fail to hit their targets or resist the script or don't want to be involved in the scam are immediately met with physical violence. The shifts that these workers pull are frequently up to 16 hours, and they are given scripts that map out exactly how to exploit the male ego and misogyny. If they venture off the script or fail to successfully get cash from these men, they face severe physical beatings, starvation, solitary confinement. If they try to escape, the cartel will tell them, "We know exactly where your family lives," and they are literally forced into this online crime at gunpoint. Furthermore, the trafficked men are kept in a state of absolute debt bondage. They're told if they make enough money and pay their captors back that they can be set free. But they can never make enough money to pay their captors back. And even breaking character can cause them to get punished. The UN official filings confirm that between 100,000 and 150,000 people are currently being held in forced labor bondage inside cyber dens like ones in Cambodia. Human rights watchdogs documented the testimony of Wilson, a real survivor who was trafficked into one of these complexes under the guise of a customer service job listed on social media. Wilson testified that the handlers confiscated his passport upon arrival and forced him into a hall with thousands of active burner phones. He stated under oath that workers who missed their financial extraction metrics or tried to break character were dragged into back rooms, beaten with pipes, and subjected to high voltage electric cattle prods or even waterboarding until they went back to typing the romance scripts. The entire operation only collapsed because 2 captive women decided to risk their lives. They managed to break away from their stations, climbed an exterior security wall of the compound, and fled into the surrounding neighborhood. They didn't speak Spanish or English, so they ran up to a neighbor's house and used a smartphone translation app to type out their story. The neighbor called the authorities, and a police raid freed 43 captive workers and resulted in the arrest of 6 Taiwanese operators and 2 local Peruvian enforcers. The Center for Strategic and International Studies subsequently cited the raid as definitive proof that the forced labor fraud factory model has gone global, migrating from Asia into South America. The cartels do a wonderful job hiding the true identity of who is actually messaging these men. So let's look how they get their flawless personas, because it's not just through Google Images. They actually data harvest and use a mid-level lifestyle influencer, micro-celebrity, or fashion creator based in South America, Europe, or Asia. And they take their profile and their story and they turn it into a weapon TRM Labs and the global anti-scam organization documented how international fraud dens use automated web scrapers to target lesser-known lifestyle influencers in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. The networks steal thousands of photos and travel vlogs from a single creator to form a deep, years-long timeline that can pass any manual check or search that this man might do on this person. ProPublica's investigations into these operations confirm that call centers have structured IT units that actually use real-time AI voice-morphing software and deepfake filters. So whenever your family member says, well, I talked to them on the phone and they didn't sound fake, the truth is that male, non-English speaking workers now can instantly alter their voice and even face live video verification calls and still match assets from the stolen influencer due to AI and deepfakes. Cartels steal these influencers' whole life and create a timeline that even includes years of birthdays, family vacations. When the old man scrolls through this woman's profile, it really seems completely believable. The cartel will train an AI voice model using audio clips directly from the original influencer's videos. Then the captive worker speaks into a headset in their normal voice, and the software will instantly morph that audio into that same voice of the influencer with less than a millisecond of latency. So these phone calls can be absolutely modified, and you can't trust a phone call to verify somebody's identity anymore. We need to talk about, in these messages, what these cartels are doing with the information they receive. During this 4 to 6 month fattening phase, it's not just text messages that fly back and forth and go into the void. All of the selfies that this man sends from vacation, videos of his house, clips of his grandchildren because he thinks he's in this intimate relationship, and often he'll also send explicit videos. The minute those files leave his phone, they do not stay on that other person's computer or phone. They are actually ingested into the cartel's centralized server. And once the cartel has your media, they will use it in 3 specific ways. The first one is with sextortion. There was a federal investigation surrounding Paul, which is a pseudonym used by federal tracking agencies to protect his family. The case was formally integrated into warning briefs by the FBI's cybercrime division. Paul was an older American widower living in a rural community who connected on social media with a profile using stolen photos of a young, attractive woman. Over a period of 4 months, the operators did not ask for a single dollar. They just engaged in total emotional validation, established themselves as Paul's primary emotional anchor, and logged every single detail that Paul told them about his adult children and his financial standing into their database. During this grooming phase, the persona convinced Paul to send a series of explicit photos and video clips as a testament to their long-distance relationship. Believing he was interacting with his future partner and soulmate, Paul complied and did not realize that his digital footprint was being saved into the cartel's centralized server. The syndicate slowly guided Paul into a fraudulent digital asset trading app where his initial investments displayed fake returns. Paul dropped his remaining defenses, liquidating his retirement accounts and transferring a total of $180,000 into the platform. The trap snapped shut when Paul's domestic bank flagged the rapid overseas wire transfers and froze his remaining accounts. The second Paul texted the profile stating he was entirely out of liquidity and couldn't bypass the bank restriction to give this scammer more money, he never heard from this woman again. Now, within a few hours of this freeze, Paul's phone buzzed from a completely different international number. It didn't come from a woman, it was a male operative who sent Paul a consolidated digital dossier. This file contained all of the explicit photos Paul had shared, sitting right next to the profiles that they also found of his adult daughter, his grandchildren, and his former colleagues. The person on the other line said, "We have everything. Pay $20,000 in Bitcoin within 2 hours, or this file is blasted to your daughter's inbox and your grandkids' friends list." Terrified of social ruin and being completely bankrupt, Paul collapsed under the weight of the extortion trap. Before federal task forces could trace where that came from, the psychological trauma was too severe and Paul took his own life. The FBI used the forensic data from his device to map out how these groups pivot to sextortion the moment that they feel like a target's financial utility has hit a wall. They found that the victims' photos All of the notes that these operators took on him and his financial information is bundled into an electronic file called a sucker list. These lists are then traded and sold between different transnational criminal syndicates on the dark web. 6 months later even, a completely different profile will text the same person, posing as a private recovery specialist or an international cybercrimes investigator who claims they tracked down the operator that scammed him and can retrieve his lost funds for a small upfront legal fee. They will use his original media profile to rebait the hook, knowing his defenses are already compromised. Sometimes they'll even pose as another woman to repeat the same process over and over again. But more concerningly are the warnings that have been published by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the FBI, which show second asset recovery networks targeting domestic fraud victims becoming increasingly common. A retired 68-year-old contractor from Ohio lost over $250,000 to a fraudulent digital asset app after a 4-month romantic grooming phase with a profile named Anna. The moment his savings hit zero and he realized he had been defrauded, the Anna persona vanished, and he was in a state of psychological and financial shock. What the victim didn't know was that his file with his name, his phone numbers, his triggers, the exact dollar amount he lost was bundled into that database file, the sucker list, and sent across the cyber underworld. 6 months after his initial loss, the contractor received a cold call from an individual claiming to be a senior investigator with a fictional international asset recovery task force. The operative claimed they had successfully raided a cyber compound overseas, seized their blockchain ledger, and located the victim's exact $250,000 pool that they lost. They even sent him forged documents bearing official-looking regulatory logos and an active case tracking number. The operative explained that to release the frozen crypto from their vault, the contractor had to pay a mandatory upfront legal retainer and international clearing fee of $15,000. Desperate to recover his retirement funds and fix the situation, the victim fell directly into the trap again. He borrowed the $15,000 from his family and wired it over. The morning the transaction cleared, the recovery specialist went completely silent, and the tracking site went dark, and the contractor was left scammed a second time. Once you feed the cartel, you never leave their ledger. You will always have your face, your voice, and your shame on the dark web, and they will continue to try to threaten you and extract information from you. This whole situation gets even darker once people take the leap to fly to go visit their new lover overseas. A well-known 50-year-old comedian and activist from St. Paul, Minnesota, traveled to Medellin to meet a woman he had been communicating with online. The date was a setup. He was kidnapped by a crew working for local syndicates, held for a $2,000 ransom, and tortured. Even though his family paid the money, the gang threw him off of a 250-foot cliff, and his body was recovered the next day. 4 people were later sentenced to 30 years in prison by Colombian authorities. In another case, an Israeli tech businessman living in Medellin went on a Tinder date in the upscale El Poblado neighborhood. During the date, the woman slipped scopolamine, aka devil's breath, into his drink. He woke up completely blind and paralyzed in a hotel room the next day. His banking apps, credit cards, and digital identity profiles were wiped entirely clean while he was incapacitated. His case was actually featured in an AFP international investigation that forced the U.S. Embassy to issue an official warning advising travelers to stop using dating apps in Colombia due to the surge in predatory poisonings and murders. This is not uncommon. Cartel members are ready to kidnap these men as soon as they land. They don't want to keep him in a dark room for 6 months. They want high-speed asset liquidation. They beat him, strip him of his cards, hold a gun to his head, and force him to log into his banking and crypto apps to wire every single cent he has to their unhosted wallets. If his family back home notices he's missing, the cartel sends a terrifying screenshot of him in captivity to force an immediate wire transfer ransom. If the money doesn't clear within hours, the victim just disappears into a landfill. There are also verified cases by the U.S. Department of Justice that show that transnational syndicates have posing as young women in developing provinces who are seeking an older Western protector or husband or sugar daddy, I guess you could say. The script plays directly into the mark's desire for absolute control and makes him feel like he's a puppet master rescuing a submissive woman. For months, the target will wire thousands of dollars meant for passport fees, medical emergencies, and travel so that the woman can move to be with him. Let's look at the high-profile federal case of Michael O'Neill. In 2024, it was a massive multi-jurisdictional sting handled by the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force under the DOJ's nationwide Project Safe Childhood initiative. Michael O'Neill was a 62-year-old American man who was actively hunting online for exploitative and underage material. Transnational cyber compounds use algorithms to find high-value targets through what they search for online on the dark web. So Michael was already identified by them as an asset line and potential mark for an entire overseas crime ring. The syndicate deployed an online persona specifically designed to mimic an underage girl trapped in a destitute provincial border town. Believing he had discovered an isolated child he could financially manipulate, dominate, and abuse, O'Neill went all in. Over the next couple of months, he engaged in explicit messages and was wiring thousands of dollars in cash and crypto directly to this young girl's account. But he wasn't talking to a vulnerable child. He was actually messaging a male cyber scam operative who was using scraped images of this young girl to rinse him dry. While the FBI struggles with international red tape on standard financial fraud, the moment a U.S. citizen attempts to distribute funds to solicit an underage minor across international lines, the transaction does register on federal monitoring grids and allows the FBI to get involved. And so the federal task force let the international scam network do the data harvesting and monitored the electronic logs as O'Neill documented his criminal intent via text and financial transfers. The moment the financial extraction phase concluded, the federal agents stepped in on the domestic side. Michael O'Neill was arrested at his residence by a heavily armed federal task force charged with attempted online solicitation and enticement of a minor and rightfully sentenced to federal prison. The case stands as a chilling example of how the cartel extorts predators and how the FBI can actually use this to their advantage to find and arrest predators. So where is law enforcement? The answer is that the FBI cares, but they're really limited in what they can do because this is happening internationally. When an American citizen loses their life savings to a server farm in Mexico or Colombia operated by a terrorist organization or a cartel, a local cop in Ohio can't really do anything. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center logs this data, but unless a scam network hits a multi-million-dollar threshold, it's really hard for the feds to deploy international assets. The U.S. Treasury Department slapped sanctions on these shell companies and accountants funding these cartel call centers. Cartels move faster than bureaucracy. They can dissolve a fake company and spin up a new one in minutes. And to the feds, it just is a game of whack-a-mole. To many men, this is almost like an addiction where they relapse over and over. After being scammed 1,000 times, how do they keep getting scammed when they get yet another text pulling them into something like this? These men are often in a state of emotional bankruptcy. This is why the cartels target these isolated, aging men. They offer this emotional validation, and when the scam collapses, the psychological shock of losing somebody that they thought was real is so heavy for their ego to process, they might just jump to another one to keep their loneliness at bay because they need somebody to soothe the emotions they had from their last quote-unquote breakup. And so cartels have taken advantage of this with how they exchange these people's information so that they can scam them again and again. Every time a man sends a wire transfer or a crypto payment to these quote-unquote women, they are funding human trafficking rings. They're funding the abuse, the beating, the electrocution of these young men and women who thought that they were getting these amazing corporate jobs and ended up getting stuck in a human trafficking ring in a concrete compound. These men's desperation for emotional validation is literally subsidizing global slavery. If we want to stop this, there are a few ways that we can break these loops. The most effective way is if you have an older relative who is moving money via cryptocurrency platforms that are unverified or random wire transfers, make sure that you report whoever they're communicating with and what the platform looks like to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center and platforms like Chainalysis. Make sure that your older family members and your family members' social media accounts are set on private. You do not want to have these people find your pictures on social media, your phone number. They're scamming your parents and your grandparents. They're going to find your information because it is information that they can use. It is power and leverage that they have against your loved one. So make sure that your accounts are set to private if you think that your loved one might be involved in one of these schemes. You're going to want to make sure that your loved ones do not have their location public, that they're not posting any pictures of any children, that they're not revealing any vulnerable details about themselves that these scammers can use. Because once you're on these scammers, these cartels, these organizations' dashboard, they will be keeping track of you for the rest of your life. You can also fund organizations like the Humanity Research Consultancy and the Global Anti-Scam Organization, because what they're doing is they're tracking the satellite coordinates of these compounds and helping locate and rescue these trafficked workers. This is a situation that's really just heartbreaking for everyone involved. And at the same time, it's really ironic that these men's misogyny and desire to be with underage kids is being used against them to get millions of dollars from them. And so while the cartel has figured out how to use misogyny and toxic masculinity and men's predatory behaviors in the West to scam them, at the same time it does do real damage where these men are taking their lives and losing their retirements, which ultimately affects the family that they have that are not even involved in this scam. Before we go, I want to talk to you about 3 wins that happened in this space recently so that we can all walk out of here feeling a little bit better than what we do right now. In June 2026, the Federal Scam Center Strike Force teamed up with some industries and tech giants and used shared metadata to flag, identify, and wipe out thousands of cartel-linked scam profiles, domain servers, and fake apps, which meant that across mainstream social media platforms, many of these extraction pipelines that were targeting these men were gone. The second is that the U.S. Department of Justice's task forces were able to seize over $580 million in cryptocurrency directly from accounts tied to Chinese and Latin American transnational crime syndicates operating these scam centers. And the third is that thanks to global political and economic pressure from world leaders, law enforcement operations have breached several of these scam compounds and liberated over 7,000 trafficked workers who are being held in forced labor bondage. The U.S. Department of Justice just executed a historic strike against one of the biggest global pig butchering networks. There was an unsealed federal indictment in Brooklyn where federal prosecutors announced the forfeiture and seizure of 127,271 Bitcoin, which is worth an estimated $15 billion. It completely ruined a transnational syndicate led by a Cambodian businessman that had a phone farm operating 1,250 physical devices and over 76,000 active social media accounts targeting victims worldwide. This was a record-breaking volume of stolen capital recovered, and it was like a domino effect where a lot of kingpins came down, high-end real estate was taken back, private jets were repossessed, and there was even an original Picasso painting that had been bought using stolen victim funds that they were able to get back. Law enforcement agencies across Southeast Asia have shifted from passive tracking to raiding these cyber compounds. The largest disruption happened when the Philippine National Police executed a midnight raid on 7 buildings in Las Piñas, metropolitan Manila, and they rescued 2,744 workers from 18 different countries. 1,500 were local citizens, but 1,100 were foreign nationals, and they had all been lured by fraudulent social media job ads and then were held in virtual slavery. These scams affect so much more than just the men who are getting tricked. They affect the family members too. I mean, thousands of dollars that could go to support kids and grandkids are being thrown at these international crime organizations that are abusing people, that are trafficking people. I am so glad that there is so much progress being made right now to combat these initiatives and finally be able to give back money to victims and their family. All we have to do is make sure that we educate our parents and our grandparents and our loved ones as much as we can about the dangers of online fraud, and continue to try to keep our information private and secure and avoid posting any information that's sensitive so that the organizations cannot have your information as well to blackmail you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Do You Want to Hear Something Awful? Feel free to leave us a rating and reach out through iwanttohearsomethingawful@gmail.com if you have another topic you want us to cover. Stay safe out there and come back next time if you want to hear more awful things.